Ok. Est-ce que... Est-ce que tu peux me mettre dans Hangout le lien quand tu l'as? Je suis avec mon compte, hein, donc tu l'envoies à qui tu veux, je vais le voir normalement. Merci. Hein? Made for kids?
Tu peux mettre PhD Defense,
Ouais.
mettre Made for Kids, donc très strict.
Ouais.
Ok. More options pour désactiver le chat peut-être.
Ouais. License, mais pas YouTube.
Sur cette technologie. Comment and writing disable.
Ouais, c'est bon, comment.
Mais je vois pas le chat.
Bah, c'est comment, je pense. Non?
Je sais pas, il y a marqué vidéo details partout. T'as cliqué sur le lien?
Non, pas encore. Je peux pas faire d'appel sur Skype?
Sur Skype?
Ouais.
Ça a été ajouté dans les amis?
Ouais.
Parce que normalement c'est là. Hein.
Normalement c'est là?
Yes.
Tu sais pourquoi je peux pas là?
Yes. Ah, web Skype.
Ouais.
Et les autres gens, est-ce que quand tu cliques sur eux, tu peux, par exemple OG? Non plus. Non plus. C'est bizarre. C'est quoi le. Ça, c'est
Audio and
pour
video call,
ton ami?
audio and video call, ça demande tu portes une ligne en browser.
Merde.
Oh, putain. Renater, on peut pas sur Linux. Renater, on peut pas sur Linux. Le Renater? Ah ouais? Ah, ok. Parce que Hangout, ça va pas bien marcher, on est d'accord, hein. C'est un peu... Si, tu penses? Ouais.
Sinon j'ai Skype ici. Hein. Et là c'est pas en web, c'est en vrai.
Est-ce qu'on fait le Skype sur l'ordi de Thierry? C'est-à-dire? Ah. Il a disparu.
Oh non. Galère ou...
Je vous en prie. Je sais, Vincent m'a dit qu'il y a le deuxième rapporteur qui n'a pas pu venir.
Est-ce que Vincent est là?
Oui, oui, il est dans le coin, juste
Ah, il est...
Non, je l'ai. En fait, il m'a écrit quand ils ont des avions tout à l'heure.
Pour la vidéo.
Ah, donc du coup, on n'aura pas les
Bah du coup, il me faut une autre.
vidéos proches.
Ouais. Pas. Non, il me faut un autre. Je sais pas. Il faut que je me connecte avec un autre ordi et avec l'ordi de.
Tiens,
Ah.
là je crois qu'on a récupéré.
Je crois. Euh, Il faut que je parle maintenant ou pas? Ouais, bah, de manière générale, quoi. Alors. Ok.
Ouais, bah, 2000 après-midi,
La soutenance de On a la tradition de présenter les gens les plus éloignés au départ, voilà. Donc, O.G. Marquez is a professor in the University of Florida.
Not exactly. Florida Atlantic University.
Florida
Not
Atlantic
Not the
University.
same.
And it's a pleasure to see you, even if we would prefer to have you with us, but it's already very nice to see you there. And Matthias Lux is an associate professor in the University of Klagenfurt. Et nous avons aussi Madame Véronique Aiglin, qui est professeure au LIRIS, donc un laboratoire de recherche à Lyon, dans le jury. Les encadrants qui sont Christophe Dehaye, qui est chercheur à Fitting Box, et je pense responsable du pôle recherche dans cette entreprise. Vincent Charvilla et Axel Carlier qui ont encadré cette thèse, et moi-même qui sommes enseignants-chercheurs ici à l'ELIS. Voilà, donc Matthieu, tu vas nous présenter tes travaux de thèse dans un exposé d'à peu près 45 minutes, et puis après nous passerons à des questions, et enfin nous conclurons. Voilà, cette séquence.
Okay.
Merci. La parole est à toi.
Merci Géraldine. I'm going to switch in English now. Thank you everyone for being here. It's a pleasure to have so many of you here. I've been working on interactive computer vision through the web with Vincent Charvilla, who is my supervisor, and Axel Carrier, who is also my supervisor. Yes, that's it. I'm going to present the work I've been doing. So, let's start with a citation, with a quote. David Marr, who was a famous neuroscientist, said that vision is the process of discovering from images what is present in the world and where it is. And we see that there are three important points here: images, what, and where. And those are the points that we're going to explain in this presentation. For those who are not familiar with computer vision, we can take the example of autonomous vehicles that require an understanding of the environment to be able to navigate autonomously on the roads. They have to understand both the 2D content that is available from images that we can see on the left of this video, and the 3D content to be able to recognize both people and urban materials and other things important to drive. So, as we can see, I'm going to focus in two different areas. First, the 2D image understanding and 3D world understanding. But to be able to do that, today the best working techniques in 2D image, for example, are based on neural networks. And they don't work automatically. They have to be trained on data sets. And due to the difficulty of the task, the training of the datasets on the datasets require a lot of images in the order of millions. And if we take, for example, Microsoft Cocoa datasets, it represents in total, in amount of annotations, something like 35 years of work for a French worker. It's not the same in every country, but yeah. On the 3D side, we can see here that even if sometimes it's working, sometimes it's not. So here we have a representation of a system that drifted, and we have a duplication of objects because of this drift. So it is interesting to put the human in the loop to correct those mistakes, even in 3D. I also said that we are going to talk about the web, and there is a really important point. One thing that is really important is that the web is available everywhere, and it's available on most devices. So it's a perfect target if we want to do annotations at scale, for example, for image annotation in the first part of this work. And recently, it is also showing that it can have very good performances, so we can run also very intensive computing code, especially the one that are used in the case of visual odometry and 3D understanding of the world that I'm going to explain later. So, I just have a sip. So this thesis is organized in two parts. First, image annotation, and second, 3D understanding with visual odometry. And I'm going to start with the image annotation side. There are many problems that require image annotation. Some of them are represented here, and not all of them have the same difficulty. We can see, for example, here that the task of image classification is much more easy than the task of image detection, which is itself easier than the task of object segmentation. So in the first part of my work, we were interested in the task of object segmentation because it is one of the most complicated tasks and one of the tasks where human interaction is most needed. Those annotation needs are usually in the number of millions. So whether it is for image classification, captions, etc., it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to annotate such huge data sets so that algorithms work automatically later. And it is important to know that it's very time consuming, and it costs a lot of resources, so you cannot do it alone, which means for image annotation that you have to crowdsource the work. Crowdsource the work, it means that you have to ask other people to annotate the image datasets, and you have to ask a lot of people if you want to do it in a timely manner. So we were interested in the qualification required by those annotators and the ease of the task, because it has been shown that if the task is too complicated, image annotation is not performed well. So one interesting point is to make it the simplest possible, and this is one of the works that explored Korinke in this paper, and they showed, for example, that among the different interactions that they try to use, the outlining and the bounding boxes, which are the top left outlining and bounding boxes bottom left, are the most intuitive and the easiest interactions for the people. So this is the one that we are exploring later. Another work of Papadopoulos that was published in 2017 explored how we can improve the bounding boxes annotations. Because even if the bounding box annotation is easy to understand, it's hard to perform well. Sometimes we don't get the boundaries right, so we have to adjust the bounding boxes such that it gets perfectly aligned with the object of interest. So in their paper, they showed that using a new technique, which is called extreme clicking, is much more faster and gives better information of the content that you try to annotate, because the points you click are directly on the object of interest. Recently, there have been also a lot of interesting work in deep learning and interactive deep learning approaches. one of these approaches was by Benenson et al. Just last year, and it consisted in helping the annotation process for generation of segmentation masks for a huge data set called Open Image. We are also interested in the segmentation annotation, but we chose a different approach. We chose to use a simpler, non-iterative way, because we realized that adding iteration to the process makes the process more difficult for people. So that's the work I'm going to detail now. The first work that we did on using the outline for image segmentation for the creation of annotation datasets. So, since most of people have tablets or smartphones or touch device, we were interested in making the annotation application accessible on those devices, and we were really interested in the outlining interaction. So what we did is we developed an algorithm which is based on outlining and results in a segmentation mask at the end based on the grab cut algorithms, but we changed the central part of the algorithm, which is what is the starting point of the segmentation algorithms. So what is considered as background, as the initialization of the problem, and what is considered as foreground. And for this, we use the skeleton of the outline, and then we extended the skeleton of the outline with superpixels to improve the points. I'm going to detail that just a little bit later. This is the global outline. So about the skeleton, we call it skeleton, but formally it's called the Bloom medial axis. Medial axis because it's the set of points that are equidistant to different points of the contours of the outlines. So basically we can represent them with a circle and disks that are tangent to the surface. As we can see here and in the previous image, sometimes the skeleton contains still points that are not inside the shape of interest. So one idea is that we could use superpixel segmentation. In particular, we use min shift, but we could have used another one, such that points that are outside the area get filtered. So if we observe the initial image, we see that the outside of the area is quite homogeneous, and those points will be grouped in superpixels that are also outside of the area, so they will be filtered out of the system. In the end, we are using the grab cut algorithm to effectively perform the segmentation. So grab cut usually work with a bounding box, but with our adaptation, we could make it start with the foreground and background information from the outlines. And we show that we have better results with this approach than with the bounding boxes. To evaluate our approach, we did a user study. So this is a small demo of the user study that people participated in. We evaluate 3 different interactions. The first one is the scribble interaction. So you have to select areas of the image that are in the foreground and areas of the image that are in the background. For this demo, I only have 2 pictures, so I can do the full demo, but for the full user study, there was a lot more pictures. The second annotation was the outlining interaction. And the third annotation was the bounding box interaction. So in the end, we retrieved the information of all the participants to the user study. And the results showed that our approach with outlines and skeleton for the filtering of points and for inference of foreground information resulted in better segmentation mask that the other approach is. The other interesting information from this user study was more on the human part than the effective results, and it was that the bounding boxes, even though faster to draw than the outlines as displayed in the first image here, was resulting in a lot more wrong attempts. So as I explained before, people were not exactly did not exactly agree with the way they did the bounding box, so they adjusted, they redo it, and in the end we showed that the people were preferring the outlining interaction over the bounding box interaction. So this was a great result for us. After having studied this interaction, we wanted to expand to the other kind of interactions and propose a web application that will enable such annotation datasets on a wider scale. The different qualities of a crowdsourcing annotation interface are the fact that it needs to be easily distributed, because we want everyone to be able to participate. We want to be reliable, because we don't want bugs in addition to untrusted user inputs. We want to be maintainable. We don't want to have to update for security issues every weeks or months. And we want it to be extensible, such that we can add new behaviors and new annotations later without fearing of regressions in the applications. So for this, we used web technology, and instead of going for the classic JavaScript, which works fine in every browser, but has a lot of downsides, we chose another alternative, which is called Elm, and it has a lot of advantages over JavaScript. All those are detailed in the thesis if you want more information. This is the demo of the web application. So on the top part, you can see the different annotation tools that are available. First, we can move in the image. We can select points in the image. We can do bounding boxes. So here I'm identifying that there is a cat. But we can also do different kind of scribbles, outlines, and we can we can use basically even the polygons interactions that are used in most of the annotated data sets. So on the left here, you can see that you have some classes. These are the classes that are used for the annotation. Here I have selected the cat annotation, so it is the one that is put in focus. But if I select the ground annotation, I can do a different annotation, and then we can see that both are distinguished. On the right side, you have different images that you can load dynamically, or that you can preload in the application. And of course, if we want to be able to do better user study, we want also to be able to restrict the interactions that are possible. So it is configurable, which means that if I load another configuration, which is in temp, temp here, I will have another set of annotation tools. Okay, another set of classes, and the image stays the same. So that was our application. Of course, there are trade-offs between different kinds of applications that exist and that are also available on the web. The most well-known one is LabelMe, this one, but basically there is a broad range of commercial and non-commercial application. One of the most recent one is Pixano. It was released this week, I think, by the French Agency of Nuclear, no, this CEA. It is able to do image annotation, but one thing that is also interesting is that it is also able to do 3D annotation. And the path they chose for this kind of annotation is directly annotating a point cloud. So here we have an example of a point cloud, and the idea is that people should indicate in this area where are the objects of interest. So we can see if I click in the middle that the tool changes for the annotation, and then we have different options to adapt the bounding boxes to fit the most possible way to the object of interest. But it's still very tedious and time consuming, so we didn't want to go to this approach, and we instead chose another approach to annotate 3D content, which is based on image. So that's what I'm going to talk now. We are switching to the second part of the presentation, mostly on 3D data. So how do we get this 3D information? So basically there are different kinds of algorithms that enable this, but the one we used was called visual odometry. It consists in analyzing images and finding the point of interest that are present in different images and try to align those images to retrieve both at the same time the trajectory that we see here in purple of the camera and the 3D environment. So I'm going to explain a little bit more in details how we are getting this information. There are many kinds of approach to get 3D information from images. Two of the most well-known are structure from motion and visual SLAM. Structure from motion and visual SLAM are very similar. They both use the same kind of algorithms, but one very important difference between the two is that structure from motion does not make the assumptions that the images follow in a given sequence. In contrast, visual SLAM make the hypothesis that images are given in a sequence, such as in videos, whereas you can use structure from motion from different images that are, I don't know, found on a Google image or YouTube or whatever. The approach we use, which is called visual odometry, is basically a simpler version of visual SLAM because it doesn't enforce the global consistency of the 3D model that you are generating from the algorithms. It is only trying to get local consistency from the last few frames and the last few images. There are different approaches for visual odometry. The most well-known are called direct or indirect. The difference between those two is that the indirect approach, which is the most well-known, consists first in identifying point of interest in the different frames of the video and try to match those points of interest in different frames. Once you have done this matching, you only use the geometric information of the matching to compute the geometry and the transformation of the camera. In contrast, the direct approach doesn't use key point or feature points association. It tries to reproject what we see in one image onto another image. And if the reprojection is done correctly, that is, if we have correctly parameterized the parameters of the camera, that is moving, the points on the image, the first image, should align with the points on the second image. So it basically consists in minimizing the difference of intensity between two images with a reprojection. And finally, there are different kind of inputs that we can use. Most well known are just mono camera, so just basic camera that you can find everywhere. Stereo camera settings, so two or more camera that are made to work together. And RGBD systems, for example, that in addition to a classic camera, have a depth sensor, usually based on technologies such as infrared lighting, which is the technology that is used for the Kinect, for example, if you are familiar with the Microsoft Kinect. And our work, which is called VORS, is in this category. So it is a visual odometry algorithm, a direct visual odometry algorithm, based on RGBD camera images. This is a global overview of our pipeline, the pipeline of our application. I'm not going to enter into the details of everything, but the important things is that we first initialize the algorithms with a given configuration. That's where you put all the parameters of your algorithm, and a first pair of images, color image and depth image. You use this pair of images as what we call the keyframe. So it will be a reference frame, the frame that will be used to track the other frames later. And then we start the tracking algorithm. So the tracking algorithms were in this way. For every new frame, we retrieve the information of the frame. We try to fit the best parameters of the camera transformation between the reference frame, the keyframe, and this new frame to compute the camera transformation. We do this iteratively up until a point where the reference frame is too different from the new frame to be able to make the comparison and to track the new parameters. So at this point, we just decide to select a new keyframe, and this new keyframe will be used as a reference for the rest of the algorithms. Those algorithms, so direct visual odometry algorithm, are usually based on image alignment. So this is the first equation of two. I didn't put a lot of details. The interesting part is that we have reference image, which is called I star here, and we have a second image. And the idea is that we want to find the parameters of the warping function between the reference image and the second image, such that the pixels aligns. So if the pixel aligns, the difference of intensity is supposed to be 0, and so we are finding the perfect parameters for the transformation. So it is a minimization problem. It is a nonlinear minimization problem, and non-convex. And for this reason, we don't have simple one-step solution. And usually the approach is to use an iterative algorithm, such as Gauss-Newton, if some of you are familiar with this algorithm. The one thing that is important in an algorithm such as Gauss-Newton is how you compute the step. So how you iterate the parameters that we are trying to find from initialization to the actual correct parameters of the transformation. When you express this step, we can see that there are different expressions, but there are two terms that are interesting and that show that not all of the information of the image is as valuable. The first one is the residual image. So the residual image is the name to the difference of the reprojection that I just explained later. The residual image, for one example, is representing on the left here. And as expected, the most differences that we obtain are in regions where we have borders and corners in the image. So that's one thing to notice. And the second parameter of this equation is the image gradient. The image gradient, which consists of the difference of intensity in the images, is also located mostly on points where we have frontiers. So all in all, we can see that most of the information of this equation is located around the area where we have hedges. And that is one crucial information, because it limits the number of pixels that we have to use to effectively compute the parameters. So there are different techniques to do this. In our work, we chose to use multi-resolution approach, pyramidal approach. It consists in starting with a low resolution image, so the first one that you see when everything is red. And in this image, we keep all the points are being of interest for the equation that we are trying to minimize. Then, at the next level of the pyramid, at the next resolution, we say that we want to keep only the subpixels that are with high gradients. And if we do that, we can see that we can still have a point of interest in the in homogeneous area, but we have a higher density of points in areas where we have gradients. So this makes for two very interesting properties that has been shown that are needed to be able to restrict the set of points that we use to minimize this equation. There are different approaches in the literature. One of the approaches is from DSO, direct sparse odometry, which is visible on the left, and the other one is ours on the right. We can see that it has similar characteristics. Points are located in higher gradients area, but there are still a few differences that I'm not going to enter into the details. But the important point is that with our approach, we are getting similar results in terms of computation of the parameters of the camera transformation, but with a much restricted set of parameters for the algorithms. Basically, the only two parameters we have is how many levels of the image pyramids and what is the threshold that we choose, such that we only keep 1 point at one subpixel, or we double the number of points at subpixel. In contrast, the algorithms in DSO, for example, has more than 11 parameters to just have similar results. So it is one thing that I was really careful in our approach. I like things that are simple, so that's one of the contributions also, making it more simpler to process the points and reproduce for other people. In the end, we evaluated our algorithms against other open source algorithms in the literature. The measure that we use is called the relative pose estimation, so RPE, and it's basically a measure of how well we are computing the transformation of the camera along the sequence of the video sequence. We used two datasets to evaluate our approach. We used real datasets composed of 47 sequences of images that has been taken in Technological University of Munich. And we used synthetic datasets, which means the images for these datasets were generated by graphics. So a 3D model generated the images, and we can have the perfect information of the trajectory that was used, so we can compare the one that we obtain with this one. In general, our algorithm, which is called VORS, a reminder here, in red on the right image, was performing very well compared to other algorithms, but sometimes, due to the lack of complexity, I could say, of the algorithm and the lack of robustness that can be viewed as an extension of our work, it drifts a lot. So that is the thing that results in what we see in the left, where the drift is causing the beginning of the sequence and the end of the sequence to be in two different locations of the scene, whereas it should be only one model. So, as we said in image annotation, and as we say in the introduction, even in the 3D world of visual odometry and other 3D annotation, we still need humans sometimes, because algorithms are not perfect, they have drifts, and we want to correct them. So we want to put the human in the loop, and we want to have an interaction to correct the visual odometry. And as we said earlier, the web is the perfect platform to make it available everywhere, and because it has a wide variety of interactions possible. So we try to do even better, that is, to put our interactive algorithm directly in a web application. There are two main difficulties to do that. First, the performances. Those algorithms are quite intensive. So up until recently, we didn't have a lot of choice to put such algorithm in the browser. Some of you, I guess all of you, remember of Java applets and Flash application. Hopefully they are not available anymore, or they shouldn't, in browsers, because they had a lot of security issues. And recently there are new approaches that I'm going to explain just later to have still great performances. For example, algorithms that are written in C, C++, and other languages can be ported directly and run directly in the browsers. The second difficulty is the interaction modalities, the way human interact with the 3D data. So except for hardcore gamers, it is notoriously hard to interact in 3D. We saw at the beginning that we had a lot of clicks and interactions just to draw a bounding box around points representing a car. And it's not easy to do for everyone. So in our approach, we try to make simpler interactions that are still usable if we want to give additional information on the 3D data or correct mistakes. Yeah, as I explained just before, keeping native performances of C, C++ algorithms in the web has been difficult, but it has been an endeavor that a lot of people try to do. So, for example, we can see that Brendan Glaser, in his master's thesis just before year 2000, was already trying to use Java applets to have an application that runs in the browser to make 3D rendering of images, of models, and to basically explore faster the set of parameters that improve the rendering. So they use a web application for that. Today, hopefully, we don't have to use those technologies. So since 2018, I think, there is a new standard on the web, and it's a standard contrary to Java and Flash, that is called WebAssembly. And basically, WebAssembly is a complementary technology to JavaScript. So what it is that JavaScript was the only language that was usable in the web previously. So it has been used more and more as some sort of compilation target, but it was never designed to be a compilation target. It was designed in 1 week actually, but then it evolved a lot. So recently they decided that we need a new format that should be available on the web, and this format is WebAssembly. And basically it's a set of instructions on a virtual machine that enable lower level of control of what is running in the browser. And to target this, most approaches today are based on a compiler or set architecture compiler called LLVM, and it makes starting from C, C++, Rust, Julia, other languages able to target this new platform. For our work, we wanted to put emphasis on being able to reuse, being able to share our code. So we chose the Rust programming language. I have detailed in the thesis why we did this instead of using C or C++, but basically it makes also targeting WebAssembly much easier than with C and C++ thanks to the tooling. So just before we redo the demonstration of the interactive visual geometry application, I want to focus on the key features provided by this application. First, we have the visualization side, and then we have the correction side. So for the visualization, we have three main important parts in the application. First, we have navigation along a timeline. Maybe you remember when you saw the first demo, we have a timeline that enables navigation along the video. So it is very familiar to people that are familiar with videos. So that's one great point. Then we have visualization of the keyframes, that is the images that are used as reference for the algorithms that are available at the top left of the application. And then we have the 3D reconstruction in the center of the application that is also that you can also move into. So you can navigate in the 3D space of the scene, but you don't interact directly with the 3D space of the scene. For the corrections that we wanted to do with this application, we have first introduced semi-automatic correction, which is the simplest one. Basically, if you detect that there is a drift, so objects are duplicated, and that the camera was passing by this area multiple times, it means that there is a loop, and it means that between the first time and between the second time, you can identify on the timeline the two instances that we want to realign. And this is the first interaction. Sometimes it doesn't work because the images are a little too different from each other. So we introduce another correction, which is based on another algorithms called P3P, so perspective 3 points. Details also are in the thesis for these algorithms, but what it means is that we can use the 2D space of the image, the thumbnail image that is visualized in the top left corner, to identify 3 points that are the same in the two images. And when we do this, it provides a new initialization to the iterative algorithms, and hopefully it helps correct the issue that wasn't semi-automatically working with the timeline annotation. So here is the demo. I'm loading here one of the synthetic datasets. So one of the 8 sequences that we have in the synthetic datasets. And I'm going to run the algorithm, the visual odometry algorithm, by clicking on this start button. So as you can see, the algorithm is retrieving the trajectory of the camera, but also importantly is retrieving the 3D model of the scene. And on the top left, we can see the image of the representation. So if you pay very close attention, you will see that the image and the visualization of the 3D points are reversed. It's actually an issue with the way they rendered the images, because they used a left-handed frame instead of a right-handed frame. But apart from that, it's just a symmetry for the model. And we don't have this symmetry on real images. So as you can see in the reconstruction here, the algorithms had a big drift in this area. But the rest of the sequence seems to be perfectly fine. So what we can do is we want to correct this drift. So we want to identify regions that are visible first in the first part of the sequence. So for example, I can choose this image where we can see the frame on the wall here. I will select this as the first reference image. Then I will come back later when we see again this area in the rest of the sequence, and I will try to do the automatic, semi-automatic realignment of those two images. Hopefully it worked. So as I say, sometimes it doesn't if the images are a little bit too different, but this time it worked. And if we restart the algorithm, it completes the tracking without the duplication that we saw before. Do we have time to show the second interaction? Okay. So I'm going to simulate a drift issue such that we can show the second interaction. So let's say we start again here, and let's say we used, was I at the beginning? First time. Let's say we start again here, and we use a second image that is a little bit too different from the first one. Oh, great, it worked. I can retry. This one maybe? Yeah. So sometimes it doesn't work, and that's why we have a second interaction. Since the application is embedded here, I cannot zoom in the thumbnails on the left. So I'm going to try to do it with small images. What I'm doing is I'm clicking 3 points on the image that should be easily located in the image of interest. So in the 2 images, and hopefully we can see that we have a better initialization once I've clicked the third pair of points. There. So this algorithm, P3P, is basically going to offer 4 choices. Up to 4 choices, 0 to 4 choices. In red, we see the error that we had just before, and here we have only 2 possible options depending on the click that we did on the images. We also have an information of how likely this position is to be the correct one. That is using the reprojection error that I explained previously, and we can click here. If I click here on the yellow one, hopefully it will realign correctly, but I'm not sure. I will see. Yeah, worse. Okay, so I'm not going to redo this demonstration. Sometimes you have to iterate to do it a few times, depending on how difficult the scene here. Here we can see that the scene is very difficult because we have a flat white wall, and the textured information is quite on the far right of the image. And the only other information that we have here is this portmanteau. I know it's not that, but that is actually not very good information because we have it's not the point of interest in this area are on the borders of the object, and so there is I would say it's not continuous. The 3D is not continuous in this region, so it doesn't give very good information. Basically, that's what I wanted to say. So, in conclusion, we have been working on two different areas. First, image annotation and segmentation, and then visual odometry and 3D understanding and correction. On the first part, we provided a user study showing that outlining for the creation of segmentation datasets was a right bet, and we could use this for crowdsourcing of segmentation annotations. And then we created an open source application that is able to provide most of the interaction that are needed for the variety of image annotation available out there. On the 3D and visual odometry part, we first worked on visual odometry algorithms, and since we had in mind that we wanted to port it to the web, we have a few choices in terms of technology, basically C, C++, and Rust. So we started in Rust because of the advantages it has to target the web. And we based our work on mostly two other works that are called DVO and DSO from Technological University of Munich. And we changed a few parts of the algorithms. So we contributed in the change, for example, of the way points are selected for the iterative minimization optimization. Then we ported the application inside an interactive web application, and I go into details in the thesis. What are the difficulties to doing that? Basically, there are difficulties related to performances and difficulties related to the way we interact as humans with 3D data and with web applications. So we tried to make an application that enabled useful correction to improve the 3D reconstruction that we obtain with visual odometry. We can also show that, as you can see, as maybe you saw when you read the thesis, there is a lot of technical contribution in this thesis, and that was one thing that was especially important for me because I really like the open source community, and I wanted to just make a point about that. So we should share our codes as researchers so that other people, other researchers, other engineers, and other non-researchers, non-engineers can also use our research. Just some perspective. On the image annotation side, few things that could be interesting would be explore different kind of annotation of interactions, such that the extreme clicking that were used in the previous work presented in the first part, and we could also work on exploring the trade-offs between annotation time and quality, and the learning rate of those algorithms that we are designing the datasets for. Because eventually, it's not necessarily needed to have perfect annotation if your algorithms can deal with noise in the data. So this is something that we just started to explore with someone else in the lab. So it's not my work, but the idea is that we wanted to evaluate how good the outlinings of the object of interest need to be to obtain good learning rate. So it's still a work in process. Maybe if you ask people that were involved, they can give information on that later. On the visual odometry on the 3D sites, there are also very exciting things that we could do. First, of course, we could improve the core of the visual odometry algorithms, because eventually humans are needed only at the frontier of what machine cannot do. So if we improve the core of the algorithms, some of the interactions that we did will not be useful anymore. So this is one thing that we could do. We could also explore different kind of visualization. One of the issues with visual odometry and those work in 3D is that it's really hard to understand the work if you don't have good visualizations. And it's something I've struggled at the beginning of the thesis when I was working on this thing. And so improving the different kinds of visualization that are available would be a very interesting approach, both for understanding the work after it's done and understanding the work when it's not working, to explore what is wrong. Of course, we could explore different kind of interactions, not just the one we presented here. And we could also take advantage of the collaborative nature of the web. So the web is not only the platform, it's also the network, so internet. And even though there have been a few work on distributed collaborative visual odometry, we could take it to like another scale by just using the protocols that are available on the web to, I don't know, make a more interesting collaborative real-time visual odometry, for example. So that's a few of the perspective, and that's all for me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the presentation. So we are going to start the questions, and there are two people that wrote a report on your thesis, who are Véronique Aiglin and Matthias Lutz.
Okay.
Matthias and Auger, can you hear us? No?
I don't know if they can hear you.
Their mic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Okay,
Good. I propose that we start with Véronique.
I can hear you, yes.
Good. Thanks a lot. I propose that we start with Véronique Aiglin for the questions. She's going to start asking the question. Please react if you don't clearly hear what's going on here.
So, thank you very much. First, I want to congratulate you for your work. I really appreciate the presentation, with interaction. It's not so easy to make something from scratch and during the presentation. To be not sure that it will succeed, it was very perfect. Thank you very much. I also want to congratulate you because you make a very important work for the community, and I think that it's not usual. Most of the time we are working on some more fundamentals of the sciences, and you make proof that you propose something that can be reused, and I hope that we will do that in our computer vision laboratories, of course. So for me it's something really important that you and we have to point out that I have put in my report many questions. You see them. So of course I cannot really express them now. I just want to underline some elements, maybe some open questions also concerning crowdsourcing. I think it's very nice, and this idea has been also reused in other domain of the computer vision to correct, not necessarily to help the annotation, but to correct, for example, the results of the OCR process for text recognition, and so on. So there are many use of the crowdsourcing. I think it's really interesting. So my questions are coming, so I don't have any order. I put up first order of my questions, and now it's totally in disorder.
Okay.
So my first question for the crowdsourcing is, do you think that it's possible to learn about the crowdsourcing information? For example, for your first proposition concerning the annotation, you have one user who is trying to make a delimitation of the shape, and then you make an automatic process to segment it. So do you think that it's possible to reuse the crowded information to help the next user to do not the totally the global task of delimitation, but only one part, or to improve the previous delimitation of the previous users? So you understand what I mean?
Yes.
It means that you can use in between the crowdsourcing information to help user.
Yes. Thank you for the question. There are actually a lot of approach, and between the beginning of me saying that, I will forget the things I want to say. But one thing that is interesting is to develop redundancy in the annotation process. So if you do this, you can use the annotations of some people to reuse this as inputs for other participants of the study, and such that they only have to check that it's working or it's not working. So it's not really correction, but it's one part of the things that we can do. The other thing we can do is, as you suggested, iterative correction of other inputs from other people in the study. For this, I think it depends a lot on the interaction that you are using. So, for example, if you are using only the points interaction, there is not much you can do except saying it's right or it's not right. If you are doing bounding boxes, again, if you start in an iterative process of adjusting the bounding boxes, it could be fine, but sometimes it's just better to just redo the bounding box. In outlining, one thing I could think of, for example, is reusing a general shape available from other people and validating if it's okay or if it's not okay. And if it's not okay, what you could do is use similar tools that we have in 3D graphics. So in 3D graphics, there are tools that are called mesh modeling. And sometimes you can do things like push the borders of things, grow the border of things, like as if you were grabbing areas of the section of the 3D models. I think it is one kind of interaction that we could do with the outlining. For example, we could divide an approach where people could just grab something around the outline that was previously drawn, and then move it on one side or on the other side, and use differential approaches to correct this kind of information.
It's quite nice. We have a concert. You have very nice background now.
Yeah, it's my fault.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I was moving the computer so that they hear you better, but I disconnected the cable.
I don't want to disturb you, sorry.
I'm sorry.
There is a quiz time. Taking care of that.
Okay. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you. Okay.
So, thank you. So, other question concerning this part, depending on the way that the user is in interaction with the interface and with the selection of points or the representation of the bounding box, do you have any recommendation to say yes with that kind of delimitation of way of interact with the image? It's better to use that approach of segmentation or that one. Do you make some proposition to segments with different scenario with the mid shift to suppress some
Outliers.
And so, do you have any recommendations or any possible or better combination of what kind of interaction with the user and what kind of privilege approach do you use to segment and to make the best possible application?
It's not something we explored extensively. When we did the user study, we tried to compare directly all the approach that we evaluated in parallel. But I guess we didn't have enough people in our study to show that there is a tendency for such kind of images or for such other kind of images, such that one type of interaction is better in this type of images and what kind of...
Because yes, you need also maybe more users.
Yeah, so I guess it could be interesting, but we don't have the data, and I don't know for sure.
And the next step is, do you propose some annotated data sets, some new annotated data sets with your technology? No?
So at some point, we were working in collaboration with PhD now here, that was annotating cellular biology images of concerts. I think the application was used at some point. I'm not sure if it was used entirely to get the dataset. I think it was not, but it was something that we explored. I think it's not published yet. Maybe you can discuss with Sonia later. But yes, that's the only new dataset that we have been working on. Otherwise, we used a study for the what I mentioned before, the evaluation of the quality of the outlining for the Pascal datasets, which is already available. Yes.
Just one remark, in your slide 20, I'm not sure, but how to integrate two graphics. My question was, is it true to say that the more the interaction is quick and short in time, the interaction is very quickly realized, the most the error can be obtained?
I don't think it's general. So if I understand correctly, is that the faster the interaction, the more error we get?
Yes, is it true or not?
I don't think so. Here we have a correlation between those two facts, but as what was the name? Yes, as Papadopoulos showed in their work, was that we can take inspiration from one type of annotation and do it much faster without increasing the error rates. So I guess if you are smarter in the way you ask people to annotate and the way it gives information of the object of interest, you can achieve faster interaction without more errors. But I think it's really case-by-case problem.
Yes, it depends also on the kind of images you have. And here, for example, you have one image that you need to segment. If you have different objects in the scene, what's happened? For example, you have a car, and you also want to segment the car because you have also the car in the image. So why not say that this image represents the car rather than the motorbike or something like that?
Yeah. So regarding what we want to annotate, I guess it really depends on what are the what is asking of the annotator. So if the annotator is asked just outline the object of interest, maybe it's a bit vague, so you don't know what you want to annotate. If it's explicitly said, annotate or select the motto in this image, so you need to have this information. You can devise a multi-step annotation process. This is one thing that has been done in Cocoa, I think, Microsoft Cocoa. So they use different steps, and some of the steps was to identify object of interest. So they were asking some people, for example, is this correct that there is a motto here, or is this not correct? And then if it was statistically validated, they're asking other people, can you segment the motto in this image, etc., etc. Regarding multiple same objects in the scenes, it's not something we try to do. Most of the images of the Pascal dataset that we used was single object of interest. But I guess the grab cut algorithm is generating two models that it's trying to fit in the image, Gaussian mixture model for the foreground and the Gaussian mixture model for the background. So one of the things that is done in some work, I think in this work they do it also, I don't have the image right now, is that they use, if you have the bounding box or the outline, instead of using the whole set of the image for understanding the background of the image, they only use a small area around the interaction. So if they do this, they can learn the background model with a restricted area where it is supposed that there is not another instance of the object of interest. And then the learning of the inside will learn a correct model for the object and can be used to detect another instance of the object in the image. But you have to restrict, and I guess it brings parameters, how much you restrict the area. And,
Here you restrict, but you can also have, for example, in mind the idea to propose to the user to segment different objects or to give some element of depth, for example. Foreground, middle ground, background could be differently precise. And the instructions to the user, you speak to the way of the user, how the user is able to understand the instructions. Do you have difficulties with that kind of instructions? And maybe more for the next proposition that may concern the movement and the 3D reconstruction is more difficult. Do you have a problem with the communication, with the interface, with the way of thinking the segmentation and the odometry and so on?
Yeah, that's a hard problem. Making other people understand you, especially when you are not in direct contact and it is from textual information. We have seen in previous work that in user study, for example, people don't read the instructions. They go as fast as they can, and if it's not clear enough, they will do it wrongly. So it's really hard to design the instructions so that people understand what we want them to do. I think there is some kind of psychology in doing that. It's not my research, so I'm not sure I can give a lot of information on that. I forget what was the other part of your question, sorry?
The part of the question was how to be sure that the instruction is well integrated for the user.
Yeah.
And if there's some ambiguity to segment best or to propose for the odometry the good reference frame and so on. So what is the difficulty in that kind of task and the risk to make more errors to the 3D reconstruction or more error in the segmentation, for example?
Yes. So I think the most analysis you can embed in the automatic analysis you can embed in the annotation process, the better it is. For example, I didn't show it to you previously, but in the user study that we did, oh, it's not here. It's here, this user study. Here we ask people to draw a bounding box around the object, and if you do a small bounding box, it will detect that it's a small bounding box, and it will ask people to redraw a bigger bounding box before they can go further, because we detect that it is probably an error if they click somewhere or if they did a mistake. So the more analysis you can bring into the process, the more it is. But of course it's not perfect. Especially in 3D, we did not use the interaction from with people outside of the lab. So there are very few people that use it, basically me and a friend.
I understand.
And I was there to explain it.
Yes, sure.
So even though I tried to design the buttons as best as possible, at some point I didn't have time. So I left the button as they were for the previous interaction, and it didn't really make sense for the last interaction. So it's not perfect. Regarding the first point, one thing you can do when you make a crowdsourcing application is generally making a validation step to select to detect early people that are trying to game the process. So what we did, for example, is that in this study we had what we call the gold standard image, and this was the second image that we see here. So if I go to the second image, we see there's a balloon here. So the balloon here was used as a gold standard to detect if the people that were doing the annotation were respecting the task, because we can detect with this image when we can embed the real segmentation that people are not doing the task correctly. Other information that we can get from this image is some kind of parameters of the people that are using the task. I don't want to say people have parameters, but for example, some people draw outlines very close to the shape, and some people draw outlines very far away from the shape. So depending on the characteristics of the interactions, we can use some of the images to try to figure out if this annotator is more of a close to the form or far away to the form. And we can use these parameters. So for example, we analyze this, we use the standard deviation of this, and this is one of the things, we use this standard deviation to not fix, to reduce the set of points that are used in the skeleton. So if you see the skeleton here, you see that there is a set of green points here. Actually, if we take all the points that are center of disk tangent to the outline, there will be far more points than this. But we used the information given by some gold standard images to find the standard deviation of how people are far away from the shape, to restrict only disks that are at least at a given distance of the outline, depending on people.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to take too many time, but I have some questions for the last part of your work,
Okay.
Which is really interesting and really more dependent on the contents and the diversity of the contents and the resolution of the image. So my first question for the last chapter of your work is, you use a selection of points based on gradients and multi-resolution of the representation. My question is, you don't speak about the camera resolution and the devices that you use.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a relation between the image, the quality of the image, the number of points, and the intensity of the gradients? And how do you manage that kind of diversity that you can have between different sequences? And do you have a very large drift or differences of results depending on the quality of the camera and the movement of the camera and so on? Do you have any measures to explain that?
I don't have specific measures, but I can tell you a few things. Sorry. Blackout.
Image resolution.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have device, but you have other factors like the fuzzy situation when you move too quickly and so on. So there are different elements that can disturb the results. How do you manage it? And are you able to predict something like that, or to make the user in certain predisposition to be sure to be careful to some element, or do you process everything like if it was only with one single device for all sequences?
So there is in practice and there is in theory. In practice, we evaluated our algorithms on datasets that follow the Technological University of Munich specification. including the two that we presented here. And in this dataset, they say that images are 640 by 480 size. So we can use that as an information, but it's not exactly how we chose, for example, the number of levels of the pyramid. In another work that I mentioned here, so DSO, where they use where the results in this pixel selection, they evaluate the impact of the number of points that are used in the algorithms. And they show that if they have more points, usually the quality of the tracking improves up until a certain amount. So for 640, 480p resolutions, I don't know if it can be translated for other resolutions and types, but they showed that using approximately 1,000 points in the image is a threshold above it doesn't improve a lot. So what we did to choose the amount of levels of the pyramid is that we know that at the lowest level every pixel will be a candidate, and then there will be at least one candidate point per pixel. So it may increase slowly because it increases only in regions where there is a gradient, but it will not be lower than that. So what we chose is to choose the smallest resolution of the image, such that we have approximately 400 points in the image, so basically 20 by 20. And if we do that, it resulted in sequences of images where we have between, in practice, 800 and 2,000 points in the full resolutions. So the number of levels of the pyramid was depending on the resolution that we want to choose at the lowest resolution.
Normalization at the beginning to be sure that you have enough, and
yep.
then you can build your different level and so on. And if you have at the beginning very few points, because for example in scientific images you can have some situation where you don't have so many.
Yes.
Only a very simple scene, and then you know what's happened. So how can you increase it artificially? Do you do that or not? What's happening?
No, I don't. It's some of the things that I kept as simple as possible because I was also new to the field and I have a lot of issues to deal with, and I didn't have the time to evaluate different parameters for this thing. So I'm sure if you have blurry images, if you have sequences where you suddenly see the sun or very homogeneous images, it will be different. And of course, we can find a different set of parameters, but it's not something we take the time to evaluate.
And concerning the synthetic images, the WORS algorithm work very well. It's because it's very nice, the texture is very clean,
yes.
So you don't have a distractor. Is that the reason why it's so good, or is it because the scene has been selected among a large pile of scenes and you only select the easier one?
So it's really not my mentality of doing these kind of things, just to reassure you. So we use all the scenes that were available. Of course, we tried to understand what was going wrong in some scenes, but we kept it in the datasets. One of the reasons why the synthetic images, so I don't have the visualization here, but here in total, we can see that the medium quality of our tracking is around 0.02. So basically 2 to 3 centimeters for 1 second drift. And in synthetic images, it's much lower, like around the millimeter approach. So it is a lot better in synthetic images for different reasons. But the most important reason is that we made a perfect modelization. So our modelization, the equation that we are minimizing here, is the direct reprojection of points in one image to another image. So with synthetic cameras, the points, if we don't have intensity changing by changing the power of lights in the sequence, the points will be exactly similar. So the thing we are minimizing is almost perfect, except there are a few things that are not modelized here. So one of the things that are not modelized here is the reflective surfaces. Because in with reflective surfaces, it's not only the general intensity, the general lighting of the condition that are important, but also the direction where you are looking from. So all in all, I guess there are not a lot of material that are metal-like in the synthetic images. So except from the frames that are a lot of reflex, we don't have many issues with this, but it is the kind of things that are difficult to deal with in real images. Yeah.
So, just one last.
Yeah.
It's more you could conclude your PhD by saying that the interaction and the crowdsourcing is something that can generalize some computer vision tasks. Because you speak about that in the manuscript, so I just re-express what you have written. What the notion of generalization, something that is more robust or something that can improve, correct, and so on. Do you have any conclusion about that? Are you sure today that it's really true, or it's just the beginning of something that could be really, or it's the starting point of something that must be followed because it's a good idea and you need to improve it? And are you sure that it's a good way to produce a more annotated data set, correction, and or do you have in mind the idea that no, it's deep learning that is the best? Have you? Can you speak just 1 minute about that?
Yeah. So it's kind of a tricky question. At the first conference I went when I presented our segmentation work. At the poster, someone came to me and told me that what I was doing was useless because we could do it better with deep learning. It's true that deep learning can be used in different approaches. One of the work here was using deep learning inside the iterative process to improve the segmentation. But the only areas, I think, where deep learning approaches can make progress without a human giving inputs is areas where we have very good modelization of the generating of the process that is analyzed by the deep learning approach. If you have a very good modelization, we can generate data. And if we can generate data, it can be annotated automatically. So we don't need annotators, we don't need people. We can generate data and train on the generated data. But not all fields can generate data, either because a reason I don't know, or because it has not been modelized yet precisely enough. I guess with time we will need less and less human annotators. I hope it's not too soon, but yeah, that's all.
Thank you very much for your questions, and also stop now. Sorry for the time.
So thank you for these questions, and Matthias, maybe we can listen to your questions.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yes.
I'm even back with the camera.
And we can see you.
Nice. So, from my side too, thank you very much for the great and entertaining presentation. I especially liked how you combined those two parts by showing the annotation tool by a company that shows for me a little bit that this is a topic that also interests the industry. so from academia to industry. So I have a few very small questions. For the second part, I was wondering if a next logical step, and somebody already said deep learning, would be with deep learning, do object recognition and then match in frames, something like the example you showed with the picture on the wall. That you detect the picture on the wall, there's a picture on the wall, maybe it's the same, and then do the drift thing automatically. Do you think that's possible, or where would be the really big things, the big problems to tackle with that?
Yes, that's really possible, and actually it has been starting to be worked on. There is a paper, I don't remember the name, but some people are doing jointly the visual odometry and the semantic understanding of the scene, such that they can use the semantic understanding of the scene both for loop closing, for example, when you get back to the scene later, or it can be used to help understanding the object of interest, because if you only use 2D images and you analyze the video, for example, in one frame the 2D image is understood, and in another the object of interest is located, and the next frame the object is not located. So in these types of situations, bringing together both the 3D approach and the semantic understanding of the scene is something that is being worked on. But I've known one paper doing this. I'm sure many more are going to try, but I've personally not tried to do it.
Okay. Another question I would have is, you mentioned that there are opportunities with RGBD cameras and stereoscopic cameras. Do you think there will be things like that for the end user, or is this was this just a hype?
Okay, so concretely, there are applications developed in mobile markets. So I think there is a market, and people are trying to bring this, I guess, first to businesses and then to people. IKEA is using, for example, similar technology for augmented reality, such that people can show furniture that they want to add in their rooms. And I know, for example, that I can make reference to my parents here. They are working in they are making furniture for people, basically, but tailored. So what they do is they go to their apartments, they take measures, and then they go back to the shop, and they try to modelize a little bit, add the things that they want to add in the scenes, and all of this is some of the things that could be automated, for example. So I guess there is a market. What I think is the main issue now is that it's not robust enough yet, such that people will be satisfied enough. Because if something is not working, it doesn't matter if we have 95% of precision. Something is not working, it's not working. So I think the issue is with the robustness of the system. But it will get there. Mm.
Okay, then I have two more questions for the first part of your thesis. So one would be, I was interested, and I think there was a question before that targeted this direction with how do people learn to use the annotation tool. Did you take a look on the annotators agreement? So if people would agree, if this is the bounding box, if you have 2, 3 or more annotators, would you agree on that? And how would the interaction approaches change the agreement? Do people agree more with scribble? Do they agree more with outlines? Or do they agree more with bounding boxes if you have multiple annotators?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. If I had to take a blind guess, I would say outlining is the most understandable interaction, so people should agree on outlines, whereas scribbling foreground and background is a little bit more complicated, like what is the background? What is the part of the foreground you want to scribble? I sincerely have no idea, but I think if we want to develop annotation process where we can embed verification of other users, this is a really interesting question to select which kind of interaction is better for the verification of the quality of the interaction, but I have no idea.
Okay, yeah, I was just, maybe you thought about something, that was why part of the question. And second question on that, Adobe has issued a hybrid approach of selecting foreground and background and selecting objects, so you just click on the object and Adobe then is able to do the outlines of it. Did you think about something like that, and do you think it's possible, and especially on the web?
I hope it will be possible. I think Adobe is one of the best company to have the ability to do that, because they have already tried to port some of their products to a web application. For example, Lightroom, which is used for photography, has been ported to the web already, and they are trying to port other systems. This process of interactive segmentation with points is one of the work that was presented by the team that did that annotate open images datasets last year. So I guess it should be possible. Today we have the tool to do this with WebAssembly and C++, but I'm not aware of a software or a paper that already do it on the web. But,
okay.
Yeah.
Now for the web as a platform, I've noticed, and I really like that you're a very good engineer and you have implemented everything yourself. So you definitely have a deep understanding on the web and the web as a platform. What you a little bit lost out, or what I didn't get, was what are the actual limitations of the web as a platform? So we've seen impressively what's possible, but I want to know what's not possible. Do you have any ideas for me?
Yeah, what's not possible is to get everyone agree on which API gets implemented in the web, because there are, so basically there is Google, there is Microsoft, there is Apple, and Mozilla, that are the four main characters of the web technologies, and they don't have the same goals. One of the issues is that there is a balance between what the W3C, which is the public consortium that try to make the formalization of the web technologies, and the companies, they don't agree what gets into the API of the web. And usually what happens is Google needs something, so they design an API for this, they put it in their developer release, they try to convince the other actors of the web, and if they are convinced, other people interact, add also the same specification to their browsers. So for example, recently, or in a short amount of time, you will be able to use USB directly from a web. You will be able to use your fingerprint to get, I don't know, use as a password. But some of the things that, for example, that are not possible today is access your drive, because there are security issues, and they all take security very seriously. So this means that if you don't have access to a drive, which is a local fast access to data, there are a lot of things that you cannot do if you only have access to them from the networks. I think that will be one of the limitations for the next few things we want to do on the web. And of course, there are hardware issues like how do you implement Bluetooth? How do you implement integration of accelerometers? Those are already available in some browsers, but not all. And yeah, that's the few issues. It's what you get on the edge of the browsers. Just wait for someone to implement it correctly and try to wait until it expands to the rest of the platforms. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks. And there's a final question I always hear at the committees for PhDs, and I really like it, so I ask it myself all the time now. So at the beginning of a PhD, you typically have no idea where you end up. And those research questions seem totally out of scope and from another galaxy. But at the end of your PhD, you're a valuable source of finding research questions for other PhDs. So if you would have to suggest one or two PhD topics, what would you suggest based on your experience with your own PhD?
Oh, so I'm not ready to start another one, that's for sure.
That's okay. That's another person.
I'd say I really enjoyed working on the 3D parts, but mostly I think it's more personal because I'm a little bit of a gamer and nerd, and so I mean 3D technology is fantastic, and if people are interested in it, I guess I would say that's one area that is really interesting. Try to work on augmented reality, on 3D understanding of the world from different kind of sensors we have, whether it is, I guess, mostly images, because that's what I know. And yeah, I think that's what I'm most excited about, like working on the understanding of the 3D world from images. So.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's from my side, so no more questions from Austria.
I have one question.
Yes. Please.
Are you using deep learning for the background blur?
No, it's just in Skype. I saw it with O'Shea and I found the button in Skype.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot for the questions. So now we are maybe going to ask Auger if you hear us and you are also willing to ask some questions to Matthieu.
Of course, a great pleasure. So let me start by saying that I normally don't wake up in the middle of the night for PhD defense. Last time I did that was 5.5 years ago, and the candidate was one Axel Carlier. And I had to do it again this time around with Axel in a different role. So it's a pleasure to be here. And I want to start by saying excellent job, Matthieu, in every sense, particularly in the presentation. I always find it hard to compile 4+ years of hard work, deeply technical, into a presentation that is friendly and yet doesn't water down what you have done. So you did a phenomenal job, and you were very brave to try some live demos on the day of your PhD defense. I don't know if I would have the courage to do that. So I commend you for that. I have been around for a while. I'm the guy with the gray beard, the so-called senior faculty member now. And when I look at the work you did, I start to look at it from a perhaps broader perspective, rather than, even though I have a million questions about specifics of this or that, the broader picture and the way by which your work should be judged, or so I think, would be based on scope, quality, and amount of work. The amount of work is incredible. You did a lot, both as a scientist as well as an engineer. I second Matthieu's words when he praised you for being, in addition to a scientist, an excellent engineer. And I have your GitHub repo open on another window right here. And I even played with the demo during your presentation, which I hadn't done before because I didn't know it was available to the public at large. Remarkable work, enormous amount of work, and brave enough to try two very different areas, 2D image segmentation and the visual odometry, 3D understanding of the world. So I have many more words of praise to mention, but in the interest of time, I will go straight to the questions. And I will start from basically Matthias's last question. He asked what would be one or two PhD topics you would suggest for someone else. I normally ask a related question, which is if you had a chance to stay for another 6 months, say, working on your PhD topics, what would you do for the next 6 months?
So I'm the kind of person that gets really deep inside the thing I want to understand. So one of the things that really frustrated me is that I've been passing the 5 past months like writing the thesis on other different administrative or other things, and I get frustrated by the extension for the visual odometry that I didn't have time to do. So I think that's what I will work on, but I guess priorities.
Right, that would be your priority.
Yeah.
On a related note, if you don't have another 6 months, which you don't,
yeah,
for the PhD, what would be the ideal job for Matthieu after finishing this? Are you looking at academia, industry, research lab? What would be the ideal job, both in terms of scope and topic?
So I have a page on my website where I detail my ideal job, and
I didn't know that.
I wanted to do the reverse. That when companies are looking for people. So
All right.
basically, my ideal job will be I'm able to do open source. I'm able to work with exciting new languages because I'm kind of a language nerd, such as Rust and Elm and other things. Of course, the company would try to make the world a better place, like working on the environment or something like that. And if it's friendly and we have ping pong table, something like that, it's great.
Wonderful. And I just found the page on your website where you say those things. Wonderful. Very good. So I think I have a few technical questions. And to me, the interesting thing about you tackling 2 dramatically different topics was that they caused completely different reactions. Part 1 was warm, fuzzy feeling. I've done work in that area, as know, with some Excel and other colleagues. Part 2 was new to me, so it was a good challenge to your abilities in terms of writing and explaining things, because you have to explain a new topic, visual odometry, to someone who knows the components of that but hasn't worked in that space at all. So interesting feeling to look at a thesis that has something that I can probably make very precise observations about in the part 1 of your thesis, and one in which I'm basically the learner here. So in part 1, I have a few questions. In the debate between the deep learning crowd and the nasty comment that you got at the conference, I think one strategy is to point out that even AI experts these days speak very highly of human in the loop, human augmentation, and how many problems are not solved with AI or deep learning alone. So maybe down the road, if that's of interest to the research group at large, you could even think of a publication in which you frame the adaptation work, the interactive human in the loop philosophy, in terms of the deep learning era, in a way that maybe is not as compelling yet in your document. So would you continue doing user studies for image segmentation? Or to put it more broadly, if you had to go back, say you get a 6-month grant or 1-year grant, and you have to work on 2D image segmentation following your existing work with user studies, GrabCut or alternative algorithms, mobile devices or otherwise, what type of directions in that particular space do you think are worth pursuing, either by yourself or by others?
Yes.
So to be more specific,
yeah.
would you consider larger user populations? Would you consider the classical desktop mouse as a complement to the mobile? Would you consider instance segmentation, so more than one object of interest in the same image? What type of direction do you think is worth pursuing?
What we wanted to do, and that was started a little bit by a colleague, was really exploring the quality of the annotations. So what quality of annotations is needed to get good learning rates for deep learning algorithms? Unfortunately, I'm not really an expert on deep learning, so I know the basis, I know the different kind of approaches. So I'm not sure I'm in a good position to propose the best approach to work on.
Would you consider
Yeah.
gamification as Excel and others did in the past? You didn't do anything to incentivize the annotator to be a better annotator. In fact, I loved your quote earlier today, people don't read the instructions. I thought that was awesome, because no matter how much effort you put, perhaps even with those introductory screens and guidances,
Yeah.
they may want to get to the actual thing. And gamification, as you mentioned, even in your literature review in the thesis, has always been hoped to be an incentive. Have you considered going into that direction or not?
I didn't. I'm not really sold on the fact that we can gamify every single subject. I'm sure that there are really interesting applications that can make this transparent for the user. For example, a few years back, I was using an application called Draw Something. I don't know if you heard this.
Okay, I think I did, yeah.
And the idea was that you have friends, so it's not only a gamification, but it's a collaborative game.
Right.
Where you work with other people and you ask those people to draw things, and your friends need to guess what you had drawn. So this is really interesting in terms of trying to understand ideas of objects, because when we draw things to get recognized, we just draw the ideas and not the details. So I think it's one thing that could be interesting, but I'm not sure about everything. I'm not sure everything is we can gamify everything.
Good point. Going back to a broader view here, you have done an enormous amount of work, probably the work of an entire research team in one person, and you have basically laid the groundwork for other researchers and other groups to use your code, your data sets, your ideas. So the question is, how can you make your work or your tools more visible to the community at large? Have you thought about strategy to get your GitHubs to be popular enough and things to be visible and adopted and used?
Yes, it's actually a double-sworded question. If you are not ready for something that gets out of hands before, it gets worse. So one of the things I struggled with was the second part, which is not published, the part on the visual odometry. I decided to keep it public and to make it open source also. And I have been having very good interactions from other people that are interested in this work and that are starting a computer vision group for the Rust programming language. But effectively, I didn't talk about it anywhere specifically. The only people that came back to me were because they saw questions I asked about specifics of computer visions on different forums, and so they contacted me later to try to work on things together. But I didn't want to do it because first, it's not published yet, and second, not that it can get out of hands, because maybe it will just stay like that and never be used by anybody.
Right.
But I don't want it to be like publicized before I've perfected the things.
I see. On a related note, what are your future publication plans? I see in the thesis that there's at least one explicit mention to this work, which is basically part 2, will be published.
Yeah.
I was wondering more specifically if you plan to also publish in non-scientific references or conferences, because you have a lot of work on the development side, on the engineering side of things, even maybe in terms of making Rust and Elm and WebAssembly more popular to the scientific community. So I was wondering if you have thought of publications that are opportunistic in the good sense of the word, in this sense of appealing to developers, to professional software developers and data engineers and so on, in addition to the scientific crowd who is interested in the computer vision aspects of what we're doing. What are your plans?
Yeah, so regarding the scientific part, as you may have seen in the thesis, framing the second part of the work in a way that still have scientific contribution is a bit difficult. And in that way, we tried sometimes to target deadlines, but we didn't have the story to make it such that it feels like it pertains the kind of publication that people want in those applications. So regarding this aspect, I think we still have to find the right framing, and maybe if we just do the small few extensions that I didn't do because I had to prepare everything, it could get just past the classic qualitative evaluation such that it is enough for publication. So for the second part of this, the engineering part, I am really active in different open source communities, and especially, for example, in the Elm language, I am organizing Elm meetups. So I used to organize Elm meetups in Singapore, and now I organize Elm meetups in Toulouse. But we are late 2 months because I didn't have time.
There was this PhD thesis thing on the way, right?
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, that's basically it.
All right, excellent. So I think that's it from, and I would again congratulate you for the amount and quality of work and for laying the groundwork for many people that will come after you, and wish you all the very best in the next steps of your career.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Roger. I think the jury members highlighted the applicative amount of work you put in your work, and as a witness for that, there is also Christophe Dehaye within your committee, and working in practical environment in the industry. So please.
Yeah, hi Matthieu. So I'd like to reiterate the praises you received about the clarity of your work, both in the PhD thesis and your presentation. I don't know if it wrote itself, but it surely looked that way when I read it. So congratulations about that. Also on the presentation, I was really impressed by the live demo. At first, I thought that it was really impressive to have something run inside the presentation, and later on, I was even more impressed by the simplicity of the design of your demos. It's subtle things, little things like the organization of the UI and so on. And I think it really shows that your attention to the quality of the user interaction, and it's a testimony of what your work is about, also providing simple and accessible tools to people who have to do hard work on a daily basis. So this is something that I wanted to find out. I have some question on the first part about the annotation, something that was already touched on earlier, about the agreement of multiple annotators, and I don't know if you know this tradition in some of French villages where they usually in their annual fair they organize a raffle where you can basically win like a big piece of ham, and the game is to guess the weight of the ham, and the person who gets the closest to the actual weight will win it. And one common, well, I don't know if it's common, but one strategy to have a chance to win that is to speak last and to guess a number which is the mean of all the previous guesses. So this reminds me of this kind of thing in the agreement things about the annotation, because you could use something like a statistical agreement. So you would broadcast the work for a given image to multiple annotators, and then not use an individual annotation, but the statistical mean of the annotator. So I don't know if you thought about that. And
we thought about that, but we didn't have time to implement validation. So if it was easy, we could have done it. The issue is that validation and agreement is easy when the set of values are small. So if you go to a reunion and you propose 5 things, nobody is going to agree on what is okay. And if you propose 2 things, maybe we can find an agreement. There's a political question here. But if with the interactions that we wanted to evaluate, especially we were interested in the outlining interaction, we tried to, at some point, to modelize how we could really modelize the interaction, like how is it moving? Is it smooth? Is it shaky? Is it near to the shape, etc., etc.? But we didn't find the time to find the correct modelization, and without the correct modelization, it's difficult to find agreement between different inputs. So that's something we didn't have the time to try.
I was thinking about that also because when I saw your result when you try to extract the skeleton from the outline, I think it's a known issue that the skeleton is quite unstable with respect to the outline, and so I was thinking that maybe you could try to filter out some high frequency variation in the outline. I don't know if you did that kind of.
Yes, so about the skeleton, there are many ways to filter it out. I didn't show the image of the original skeleton here, but I have one, so I can find it, I think. Or maybe I won't. It's not my computer, so I don't know. But okay, so the skeleton you see here, you see here the disk of associated with a point that is in the middle here of the skeleton, and this disk is quite big. When you get further to the more near the contour, the outline, the disks get smaller and smaller. And I have a different visualization. I guess you have it in the thesis. So if you can find it later, you will see it. One thing filtering that we did is we filtered all the disks that were smaller to a certain amount, depending on the people annotating. But there are, of course, a lot of different ways to filters, and we have some experts on skeletons here. I guess I don't have I hope I don't have an expert's question on this later. But yes, we basically use a very simple approach, which was filtering out small disks such that only the point in the middle gets kept.
Okay. Another question on the first part is more about maybe the user study kind of side of the work. I have a question. Do you allow people to bail out of a task if they feel that they can't answer the question? Because I guess that the easy images are well, they will always be annotated, and maybe they are not that interesting as far as the quality of the final database construction is concerned. But the really interesting images are the hard one, and sometimes people will have a hard time to actually annotate them. And do you allow people to bail out instead of forcing them to do a bad job about it?
Okay, so this depends highly on how we did the user study. For example, we did two user study, one that I explained here, and the other one which is the work of someone else that I didn't explain here. The one that I explained here was the user study to evaluate the 3 interactions. In this one, you can see at the top here that you have a progress bar. This progress bar was meant to give an idea of the tasks that the people had to do, and we have a small amount of people, 20 people, so there was always someone supervising the task, not interacting with the person, but supervising, and so the people were kind of forced to do it from beginning to end. The other context in which we did this is that when we started the annotation process of the Pascal datasets with the outlining interaction, we used, for this, we integrated our application with a different configuration inside Amazon Mechanical Turk. I'm not, yeah, okay. So in this platform, you can divide your task as a small unit of tasks that are called HIT, Human Intelligent Task, I think. And people can select the hits they want to do. So if they are offered a hit, if they don't do it, they don't do it. If they offer it, they can do it, they do it. And I'm not sure, I think the configuration for the user study was done such that we have at least 2 or 3, I don't remember, maybe 2 annotations for each image. We didn't, I guess maybe Axel will know, but we didn't check if some images took a lot of time to get completed for this thing. I'm not aware of this, so I guess they can bail out, but it may have an impact, but I don't know.
Yeah. And I realized that maybe the time someone takes to annotate an image can be an information in itself about the image.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's all the question I have for the first part. On the second part, I was asking myself about the fact that you start out with points in 3D because you have the depth, and then you formulate the problem as an image matching problem. And I was thinking that wouldn't it be interesting and beneficial to use the depth of the points in itself for parts where you don't have enough gradients in the image to be able to actually perform a match?
Yeah, that's a really important question. In our work, as you suggested, as you said, we use only the reprojection, the direct reprojection error of the points. But here we have different works. They are implemented in OpenCV, and here we have OpenCV ICP. ICP is a iterative closest point, and it's a matching mechanism between point clouds. has issues in some scenes. So as we can see here, it doesn't perform better in a general way, but I guess it could provide more information in areas where our approach doesn't work. We didn't try to do it. One of the issues of mixing this is, I guess, the complexity of the algorithm you try to obtain. In our case, we did everything such that it can run in real time. When you try to compare a dense set of points, you lose the real-time capability. So depending on the context, if you want precision or not precision, I guess you could try to merge those kind of information, but we didn't try to do it.
Another question was about your comparison between the classic algorithm that you have in OpenCV and yours, and you said that one of the design principles was to limit the number of parameters, and I think it's a really important principle. But I was thinking that maybe the 11 parameters of OpenCV are there to tackle the last 20 or 10% of the situation where your algorithm will not work. And so is it that you are deciding to not treat those 10 or 20% and put the human in the loop for those kind of work, instead of having more parameters that maybe would be able to also take those harder situations into account?
Yes. So I went different ways when I tried to get the selection of points, for example, as a concrete example. And I tried different approaches. For example, in the pyramid, I used an hypothesis that in regular images, if you start, for example, with 400 points, and you sometimes double the number of points at each level of the pyramid, you won't go very far away because not most of the points are very high gradients. So you will have between 800 and 2000 points. But one of the parameters you could add is the maximum number of points that you want to have. This is one of the parameters that is available in OpenCV. But they completely went overboard. Like, for example, they showed in their papers that going more than 800 points, for example, doesn't change radically the algorithm. But still, in their implementation, they have 4 parameters to decide if they are near enough the target amount of points. So, for example, if they target 1,000 points, they have one which is a lower threshold, one which is a higher threshold, one which is how much you change those thresholds to update the algorithms. And there is also one which is, if you are not too far from the task, just randomly select a set of points so that we have exact 1,000 points. And I think I won't say it's stupid because there are reasons, but if you are near the target, adding randomness, for example, is one thing that is not good, because you add randomness, you lose very good properties of your algorithms when you add such information. So I guess there are situations where there is value in adding parameters, and definitely you can catch more edge cases, but in some other case I think it was just iterative process, and we all lack time sometimes, and we just decide that we cut it. It goes to the paper, and that's it.
I guess what you're saying is also a call for maybe the need to do a meta-parameter analysis. Maybe you can afford to have a lot of parameters, and then you based on the data set and some ground truth, you do some meta-parameter analysis, and you figure out which parameters are not that influential on the final result, and then you fix them. So maybe this is something that the designer of OpenCV wanted to do, be able to expose all the knobs of the algorithm and then let people decide which one are the
there is
that influence the result.
There is definitely a balance between where you fix the points and where you how much control you give to the coder, whereas inner implementations. I guess I chose different trade-offs, but no.
Your results show that you don't need all those parameters to have good results. So okay, so the last question I have is a little bit more still on the technical side, but a little bit of a reflection of the current trends on computing. About your work is trying to show that it's a good thing to push computational work to the client. They are using the web platform. So the web is used as a distribution platform for computation. And there is also a trend for cloud-based computation, which also makes use of dedicated hardware that people don't have on their local machine. So how do you see these two trends going on in the future?
I think you maybe have on your mind the Stadia example.
Oh yeah,
or,
those kind of workloads also.
So this example, for example, it's so Stadia. For those of you who don't know, it's a service started by Google a few months ago to enable cloud gaming. So you don't have to have a performant machine. You just need a browser, and the computing is done on Google servers, and you can still play very high demanding games. But the tendency, I'm not a journalist, shows that they are having issues. So they are having issues with latency for the networks, with the number of games that are available. So not all of the issues are technical, but I think on the technical point, the global situation of networks, because that's it, if we don't have computation with network, is not efficient enough to enable this now. But if Google thinks they were ready to launch Stadia, it's probably something that is going to be more useful with time. But one thing that is really nice with putting everything in the browser is that I'm paying only $5 for my servers, because so all the computation is done on the clients. Yeah.
That's right. Right now, you pay the price for some loss of computation because you don't have access to the strength of the hardware.
Yeah.
On the web, you still don't have access to the GPU. And
it's something that is going to change.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right. So that was my last question. Again, congratulations for your work. It was really a pleasure to have access to it.
Thank you.
So thank you for the questions, and so we are going to now just less questions, I guess, but local from local people. I don't know who wants to start.
I'll be starting. Okay. Okay, guys, Matthias and Rocher. If you don't mind, I'll switch to French because we have Matthieu's family there, so I think it could be a nice touch to speak a little bit in French about Matthieu. So if you don't mind. Okay, thanks. Oui, donc c'est un petit peu pour vous qu'on passe en anglais. Donc je parle premier parce qu'en fait c'est Axel qui est surtout l'acteur majeur de l'encadrement. Bon, même si on a pris du plaisir tous les deux à te suivre sur ce chemin qui n'était pas facile à Singapour. On peut le dire maintenant que tu es résilient. Tu résistes à beaucoup de choses, parfois même à nos mauvais conseils, donc c'est bien. Donc je vais être très bref. Je vais dire quand même que il y a toute l'équipe là, donc il y a deux grandes catégories de thésards. on peut dire, il y a ceux qui produisent du code parce qu'il faut en produire quand on fait une thèse en informatique, et puis il y a ceux qui créent des logiciels ou du code avec cette dimension créative et exigeante. Tu fais partie de la deuxième catégorie, hein, c'est-à-dire que le code pour toi c'est pas optionnel, c'est pas quelque chose qui permet de faire des cours ou des voilà, et donc c'est pour moi qui était de la première catégorie, c'est toujours assez impressionnant et toujours assez comment dire, effrayant en fait de voir que pour faire des choses qui fonctionnent complètement comme elles devraient tout le temps fonctionner, c'est très compliqué et il faut des gens avec autant de qualité que toi, de rigueur, de technicité, voilà, de ténacité pour arriver à faire des choses. Voilà. Alors, il y en a quelques-uns dans la salle qui ont juste soutenu, il y en a quelques autres qui soutiendront, et puis il y a tous les autres qui font juste des thèses et qui sont du coup différents, comme l'était la mienne. Je voulais te féliciter pour ça, parce que tu as fait une thèse que j'aurais jamais été capable de faire. Je te remercie pour ça.
Merci Vincent.
Bon. Matthieu, c'était le premier doctorant que j'ai eu la chance de co-encadrer, donc on a passé beaucoup de temps ensemble, en France et à Singapour, et pas seulement au travail d'ailleurs, parce que Matthieu est un chargeur de foot, il faut quand même le dire. Il y a eu des
You didn't have the right to continue in French.
Yes, but, sorry guys. Et voilà, vraiment je voulais dire que moi ça a été un plaisir, c'est passé des super moments à bosser avec toi. Et je voulais aussi parler peut-être au nom de l'équipe parce que comme tout le monde l'a souligné, tu as des grandes qualités techniques et tu aimes bien les partager. Donc il y a eu des formations Git, des formations Helm. Il y a une épidémie de Rust et de Helm parmi les stagiaires. Je pense que tout le monde l'a remarqué et parmi les thésards. Et aussi en enseignement, où tu es beaucoup impliqué sur les TP, sur les projets, sur tout. Donc vraiment, tu as été un pilier des l'équipe. Je pense que tout le monde va être d'accord avec moi. Tu vas bien nous manquer, même si tu repars vers d'autres horizons pas si lointains, puisque tu vas voir les 20, qui est un ancien aussi de l'équipe. Et donc, on espère que tu vas continuer à passer régulièrement nous voir.
J'espère aussi. Je vais être là pour les tests qui arrivent de toute manière, donc.
Ouais. Je vais juste conclure très rapidement. I'll switch back to English because I'm just going to say a few sentences. It's thank you for making me participate in this committee. It's a real pleasure, especially for Matthieu. It's someone I really like. I'm really so Vincent pointed out your capacity of making things work and being a geek with this particularity of being a clean geek and sharing that with others. And I'm always amazed by your curiosity. We had a lot of discussion and sharing of other stuff like tech talks, or I also, thanks to you, went to L meetings. So I'm very proud of that. Trying to get a little higher than the second category Vincent was talking about. And yeah, thank you and congratulations. So we are going to stay, I think, in this room for the deliberation because we need to be talking to Matthias and Auger.
So maybe alors peut-être que pour la salle de convivialité, ceux qui connaissent, ça vous permettra pendant un quart d'heure, il ne pleut plus mais quand même, c'est juste à côté. Donc,
Est-ce que tu